Hello and welcome to the Business of Story, your resource where you can learn from story artists from around the world on how to craft clear and compelling communications using the primal persuasion of storytelling. I'm your host, Park Howell, and I'm happy my clients call me the world's most industrious storyteller for having grown their brands by as much as 600% with my story cycle system. Chapter 6 in my book, Brand Bewitchery, is all about finding your authentic brand archetypes that inform the personality of how your product or service shows up in the world. These archetypes are based on Swiss psychologist Carl Jung's 12 primal archetypes. But today's guest believes these archetypes don't accurately convey the feminine archetypes that need to be incorporated into brand personalities. So we've invited Jane McCarthy, co-author of the new book, The Goddess Guide to Marketing, to share her collection of feminine brand archetypes with you. Before you meet Jane, I've got to introduce you to someone else who rocked my world just last week. People always ask, where do I use the ABT story structure? Well, you use the ABT anytime and anywhere you need to influence or persuade an audience. Like talking your dad into taking you to Game 2 of the Dodgers-Yankees World Series in Los Angeles. Last Tuesday, I delivered an in-person training for the Agile digital ad agency in Phoenix, Arizona. Lauren Lowell, brand and CX coordinator at Agile, took my course and sent me the following email that afternoon. She said, quote, "Thank you very much for coming into our office today. I was excited to hear your presentation after learning about the work you did with ASU's School of Sustainability. My dad took a class from them called Sustainable Leadership, and then when I attended ASU, I minored in sustainability." She went on to say, "You could say that there are many ways I take after my dad, and this is what my ABT will be about. Not about sustainability, but instead about baseball, a love that he developed as a child and passed on to me. Without further ado, I present my ABT." Just to be clear here, folks, this is the ABT she sent to her dad. Here you go. Quote, "You have loved baseball since you were a kid, and you've shared that love with me as I have grown up. Your childhood dream of attending a LA Dodgers and New York Yankee World Series is happening right now within your reach. But without tickets, neither of us will experience this monumental game because we let the opportunity pass us by. Therefore, let us continue to build upon our strong bond through something we both love by getting tickets to attend the sporting event we will both remember for the rest of our lives. Buy tickets now." And then Lauren inserted a link to Ticketmaster. She went on in her email to say, "If I need to boil this down to one word, I think that word would be dream. My dad dreamed of playing for the Dodgers when he was a boy, and I dreamed of watching them win the World Series. Being able to watch the game in person would be a dream come true for both of us. Ultimately, the goal is to get my dad to buy us tickets to the game. Any advice you have would be greatly appreciated," Lauren said. "Thanks so much for your interesting presentation." I responded to Lauren that I loved her baseball ABT, told her to run with it, and asked her to let me know how it goes with her dad. Later that day, Lauren replied in an email, quote, "I sent the ABT to my dad this morning at 8:57 after I saw your email. At 3:39 this afternoon, I got an email confirmation that he bought the tickets. I am shocked, excited, and amazed at the results of using the ABT framework. I feel so powerful with this knowledge. Thank you for sharing this narrative framework with our team. What an amazing tool." Then I asked Lauren if she had previously tried to coax her dad into buying the tickets before she sent her ABT. She said, quote, "I did send him a similar text earlier this week. My big punchline was a gif of puppy eyes pleading to get tickets for the game, to which he never responded. the ABT worked much better, Lauren said. She also said, "You've got an ABT advocate for life." Lauren sent me a great selfie with her dad, Randy, at Game 2 of the World Series. I think her story is the best example of an ROI using the ABT that I have ever heard. What's more, given that this episode is about feminine archetypes in branding, I'd say that Lauren is the archetype of the bold creator with a touch of the girl next door personality who uses her powers of persuasion by connecting with the emotion, with the heart of her audiences, especially her dad. Today's guest will introduce you to a slew of other feminine archetypes for you to choose from and to see how they might fit into your brand personality.
One wants to guard against the kitchen sink issue around trying to be all things to all people, and therefore struggling to have a clear, memorable meaning for people. And so I suggest focusing on a core archetype, but then being infinitely playful with all kinds of variety of tone and expressions of that.
Jane McCarthy is a brand strategist with over a decade of experience in advertising. She has collaborated with global and local brands in a variety of categories, working with brands like Sweet Tarts, Southern California Edison, and Boys and Girls Clubs of America. Jane's emphasis is on leveraging archetypes to unlock a brand's true essence and power. Her new book, The Goddess Guide to Branding, is focused on helping female founders and brand leaders build their brands with the help of powerful feminine archetypes. Along with her sister, Kate McAndrew, a venture capitalist and co-author of the book, she recently launched the Goddess Office on Substack, a new platform for inspiring women in business. So please welcome to the Business of Story, Jane McCarthy. Jane, welcome to the show.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here with you.
And oh my God, do I have the honor of hosting a guest on her very first podcast ever. So welcome. This is going to be great fun.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you, Park, for this first sojourn in podcast land.
Have you been reluctant to go into podcast land, or is it the fact you've got a new book out and now your publisher is saying, time to start promoting?
It's the new book. The new book has got me to become visible in a way that I haven't been before. I've always been working for companies behind the scenes. And so this is my first foray into sharing my ideas more publicly. So it's exciting, but it's also nerve-wracking. And I think anybody who shares their ideas publicly goes through this, I'm sure. It's a process.
Oh, yes, it's a process. And, you put yourself out there when you share your ideas publicly on a podcast, writing a book or several, anything you do. But, you are doing the world a great service because you're sharing what you have learned in your fairly young career. You've been in the advertising, branding, marketing world about 10 years, just over 10 years.
Yeah.
But you've learned a lot in that time.
I have. I've been a little closer to 15 years, so I'm not totally green, but I still feel that I'm a student as well as wanting to share what I've learned so far. So it's both.
Yeah. So give us a little bit of your backstory about what did you learn throughout your career to bring you to this point in time where you are really commenting on and sharing your thoughts on the feminine archetypes and how building a brand with one can be really, really successful.
Right. So I'm lucky to have had a background learning from amazing mentors in the advertising world. And we worked with multinational companies who, had very strict processes for how they built their brands. And I worked with several global brands who utilized archetypes in order to come to a strong brand ethos that can connect with people on a heart level in a universal way. So I really fell in love with the process of using archetypes as a seed point for great branding and marketing. And the classic approach in marketing with archetypes is to use Carl Jung's set of 12 key archetypes. And some examples of that are the everyman, the hero, the explorer. And one time I was at like the top floor of a big, boardroom company, and we were working with the archetypes, and I looked at on the wall because we had pasted them on the wall to pick which one was right for this brand. And one was the caregiver, and another was the lover. And then I saw the everyman, and then I saw the hero. And I thought, wow, these may not be technically gendered, but they feel like some are skewing masculine and some are skewing feminine. And I don't think it's correct that the feminine is only the caregiver or the lover, and that the everyman is the buddy next door beer drinker, and the hero is the action movie star. I think that there's a feminine expression of all of these archetypes. And so I knew there was a way to come to the archetypes through the feminine lens. And my aha moment was when I discovered the work of Jean Shinoda Bolen, who is a Jungian analyst, and she, in the 1980s, wrote a book called The Goddesses in Every Woman. And in this book, she illuminates these very different archetypes from one another through the feminine lens. So you have Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and you have Diana, the goddess of the hunt and the wilderness. And so I just fell in love with looking at the feminine archetypes through the lens of the goddesses. And that's led me to this point where I'm providing a resource for anybody who wants to utilize a feminine archetype in branding to use the goddess archetypes as a way in.
So I'm totally with you, and archetypes are incredibly powerful. I've been at the advertising branding world just a teensy bit longer than you, like 25 years more, judging by my gray hair. And, early, Jane, in my career, we did the stupidest thing. We were taught when you were trying to find the personality for a brand, what kind of dog is it? What kind of wine is it? What kind of car is it? And I would go through those practices, very diligently and try to cobble out what the personality of this brand is. But I just felt like it was dumb. And I did not really, like you, appreciate archetypes in branding until I first learned about Carl Jung through The Hero's Journey and Joseph Campbell's work. And when I looked at those first 12 archetypes, I like, yeah, now we're talking. And I applied those first 12 archetypes when doing some branding starting around 2005, 2006. And you're right, they do come across a little bit more masculine, but instead of like the everyman, I use the regular guy or gal, which is kind of the every man or every woman. And then in some of my other ones, like the, I can hardly say this word, ruler archetype, which is typically some big, audacious male, I put in there Gert Boyle from Columbia Sportswear, who was very much of a ruler archetype, but from a feminine position, from a female position, if you will. So I can totally appreciate where you are now pulling together, and it's these 8 female feminine archetypes. Let's go through the 8, and could you attach an archetype to a common brand that our listeners might relate to really understand how you are doing it?
Yeah, fabulous. So I'll start with Diana, the goddess of the wilderness and the hunt. And so Diana's energy, picture her running through the forest with her bow and arrow. This is adventuring energy. It's wild energy, it's courageous energy. And so a brand like the North Face, and we interview CMO Sophie Bambook in this book, the North Face is a wilderness brand, and it's all about exploration. So Diana is in that camp. There's a lesser known brand called Rahua that is all about rainforest goodness in your hair, that has an incredible Amazonian goddess with a bow and arrow on its shampoo bottle that I use. And that's another example of a Diana brand. So that's our...
From Hollywood, I would kind of think of someone like Katniss Everdeen, if people want to picture it in action.
That is a perfect example. Another one of my favorites is Wonder Woman. If you can remember in 2017, that character's name is Diana. And so these, and one thing that's great, Park, about the Hollywood reference you just made is just to demonstrate how alive these ancient archetypes are in our contemporary society. And it's really fun to look to celebrities to see like who's channeling Diana energy, who's channeling Venus energy. Would you like me to keep going? I know it may be a lot
Keep
to go
going.
around the
Yeah.
eight. Okay.
Maybe we won't do all 8. Let's get 3, but to me, it's very fascinating, and it certainly illustrates to our listeners and viewers how you use archetypes to develop the personality of your brand.
Yes. Okay. So now I'll go to Maiden Persephone. So this is the goddess of eternal youth. She's the goddess of spring. You can imagine the maiden frolicking through the halls of Olympus, accompanied by nymphs, going out and picnicking. She's innocent, she's filled with wonder, and she's imaginative. This is prior to her the rest of her story, which unfolds in a different fashion in the underworld. But we took a snapshot of Maiden Persephone before we move on to her queen version as this goddess of youth. And so a brand that plays in this space would be Mega Babe. And Mega Babe is I don't know. Are you familiar with Mega Babe Park?
No, it's
Okay.
a little bit out of my marketing. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about Mega Babe.
Okay, so Mega Babe was founded in 2017 by Katie Storino. It's a body care company that addresses issues not being solved by other mainstream brands. So one of her first issues she's tried to solve was thigh chafing, and she found she created a thigh rescue anti-friction stick. Now she's moved on to hemorrhoid cream with a product called Butt Stuff. And so the way that Katie delivers through Mega Babe, the energy of Maiden Persephone is rather than having a medical approach to these issues, like a preparation H feels very medical. She has so much bright, cute fun with having hemorrhoids. And she makes it joyful and she makes you feel like a teenager and this is no big deal and we're kind of delighting in taking care of ourselves in this area that used to be really uncomfortable and maybe shameful. Now we're going to have bright fun with it. And so I think that's a very powerful insight because an area where you might have felt embarrassed suddenly becomes an area to have fun. And Katie Storino is very bright and very fantastic. And the colors of this brand are like a rainbow. And so she's channeling Maiden Persephone energy toward this category, which has traditionally been more medical.
So, Katie, when you are working with her archetype, do you first start with the personality of the owner, like Katie, and what is really authentic to her? And she becomes this maiden archetype, which then is expressed and reflected through her brand and products?
Well, so I haven't worked with Katie. We referenced her in the book as best in class, and she's definitely an example of the Maiden Persephone archetype. I think something you're hitting on is very interesting. Is that when you're a founder, your personality is gold for finding the archetype that will be relevant but also authentic to what you have to bring to market. And so I think she is such an amazing spokesperson for her brand because she personally exudes that energy of brightness. And so I think she
Mm-hmm.
has found an archetypal match and I'm not suggesting that she thought about the maiden when she did this, but I think she hit upon a very powerful archetype of bright, joyful wonder in a category that you would where it's very unexpected. And I think that probably
Mm-hmm.
does connect to who she is as a woman.
Gotcha. Let's go back to that Diana archetype for a second. And you said using it with North Face, which I think most people would automatically, with North Face, first make it about a masculine archetype. But then you've done a really good job of explaining how it's also a feminine archetype. But is that because it is now being run by a female CEO?
So I think that part of what I'm wanting to do here is just it's not necessarily gendered, but to show that this archetype is expressed through the North Face with women and with the feminine is what I was wanting to do. And so we have these incredible images that
Mm-hmm.
were granted to us by the North Face of images from the brand of women climbing mountains and doing rock climbing. Of course, that's the core DNA of the North Face is as climbers. And so it was just purely to say that this isn't gendered and let's look at it through the feminine lens. And
I get you.
and that was what I wanted to offer. And so
Yeah.
some like Rahua, that shampoo brand, that does feel the Amazonian goddess is clearly there. I think the North Face, it's much more saying, hey, this is as feminine as it is masculine. This is for women as much
Yeah.
as it is for men.
Would Starbucks fall into that, given their female logo and so forth?
So I've been thinking a lot about Starbucks. What an interesting archetype, because the siren is the goddess of passion. And I did find a quote from a marketer of Starbucks years ago when they were doing the logo revamp. Do you remember that adaptation of the Starbucks mermaid, which was kind of a big deal when
Mm-hmm.
they made an
Oh yeah.
adjustment, and they said, it's passion. The passion of the siren is about passion for coffee. If you think about the inception of Starbucks, it was such a unique moment in our culture because we didn't have this artisanal passion for coffee in the culture at all at that time. And now, of course, you could just take it for granted that everyone cares so much about coffee and will line up around the block for the special barista made coffee we're going to tip $2 for. And then Starbucks seems like everyday coffee. But in fact, at the time, it was so unique. And the siren being this energy of passion and inviting you in, because what does the siren do? She calls to the sailor. It's like inviting you in to the passion for coffee. That's how I see it. So I see it actually as a Venus brand of around passion, even though you don't see every aspect of that in the brand. I think the mermaid is such a powerful emblem of passion for coffee.
Yeah. And the addiction of caffeine and sugar really adds to that passion, doesn't it? It's a wonderful thing.
Well, I mean, my goodness, I hope we're gonna. I think Starbucks is going to start to offer solutions. I hope for healthier products because I know that the sugar issue with Starbucks is a big one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I drink a lot of coffee, and I don't feel bad about it. Coffee.
Oh, I don't either. I was
I'm a
just
huge
joking with you
coffee
here,
lover.
Jane.
Okay, well, I'm a huge coffee lover, and I like I'm cool with that little emotional
Mm.
lift that it gives me in the morning. It does make me feel more passionate about life.
So, give me an example of a brand maybe run by dudes that is very much of a feminine, female archetype type brand.
Okay, this is really outside of my wheelhouse, Park. I haven't been thinking about this, and I
Welcome to podcasting.
Thank you. I mean, would you settle for a cool brand run by dudes that's masculine that I can think of right now?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me off the hook. Hopefully, by the end of the pod or tomorrow, I'll have an idea for you. But okay, so I think Deathwater is a really interesting brand. It's a dude brand, and like speaking of sort of the era of when Starbucks first started, if you had told me in the late '90s that water would one day be a big thing, that we would care about the kinds of water, that we would be really invested in different formats of water, I would have thought that was a bit crazy. Now we have this huge world in water in terms of just valuation because people are making a ton of money on water. But I think Deathwater is a great example of just pure brand force. And I consider Deathwater to be a Hades brand. This is the god of the underworld and of mystery. And I happen to know the guy who drew this incredible monstrous face on the can. He's a cartoonist, and Deathwater tapped into this desire to connect with the energy of like death metal, but not have to be drinking, because we know that the youth, especially like Gen Z, just they're not as big in terms of drinking. And so you could hold a death water can and it can just be, it looks like it's a beer can at a festival or something else. So I think that was a really interesting insight, that you could bring the energy of almost beer or heavy metal energy into water. And it's just absolutely unexpected on the shelf. It's super unconventional, and it cut through and broke through. So that's a dude brand that I give major props to. But I'll have to keep thinking about a dude brand that is. Oh, I have one. Is it too late? Can I still tell you?
No, you go ahead. You're not on the clock yet.
Okay, here we go. Madre Mezcal. Do you know Madre Mezcal?
I don't.
Okay, Madre Mezcal, it's the most fantastic label you've ever seen. This label shines in any super fancy bar in Hollywood. This label just like leaps out at you. And the energy is of the goddess mother Earth. This is the Demeter energy of the earth and the harvest. And Madre Mezcal was started by, I don't know his name, but I know it's a guy. He's a fantastic CMO. And I thought, oh, this is amazing. This is an example of a guy CMO who tapped into the earth goddess energy perfectly. And I think that is married with being connected with the artisanal making of the mezcal in Mexico and being connected to the land. And everything about this brand feels authentically folk. And if you know, outside of Oaxaca, and you know, there's incredible artisan work that happens both in mezcal but in all kinds of craft, and this brand expresses that perfectly and really honors that where it comes from, and from the earth. And so I thought that was just a class act in terms of a guy came up with an incredible Mother Earth brand, Madre Mezcal.
So for our listeners right now, and they are thinking about, boy, I've got this brand, but I don't really have my personality archetype dialed in. What are some of the things that you take your clients through that they could do immediately to start thinking about what's the right archetype for them?
Okay, so the first exercise is to you take your system. So whether you're using my goddess system of the 8 archetypes or you're using Carl Jung's 12, you could kind of just lay them out like a clock on a big sheet of paper so you have them before you, and make a little description next to them so you know what each of them mean at their core. And you can find this online or through my book, The Goddess Guide to Branding. And you ask yourself first, what is the most natural archetype for this category? So that's the first way in, is because that's the mindset probably that people are in. So a first stop is definitely, what's the most natural archetype? The next stop is, who is exciting you? You know, sometimes you see an archetype and you're like, oh my goodness, I have 5 ideas for my brand. So I feel energy around this. This feels authentic to why I love working on this company, or why I started this company. So who's exciting you and giving you ideas? Because we're looking for a muse here. So who's going to give you ideas? Because branding is not just one moment. It's world building. It's constant. So we want to work with an archetype who will continue to inspire us.
So where do you look to find that muse? Are you talking about your colleagues giving you input, your clients giving you input, your competition giving you input in the way they're positioning and projecting themselves?
I think the next thing I would do, the next exercise after who's inspiring you, which is you could do this as a group brainstorm. Like where would each of these archetypes take us, and what feels like there's energy here? Who feels creatively inspired? Whose juices are getting going? Because this is going to lead us to some big ideas. The other place to look is to map the other players in your category to the archetypes and look for white space. So what archetypes are not yet being done? So that example of Death Water, not many waters, if I don't think any waters were playing in the Hades, god of the underworld space. You know, a lot of those brands were Fiji Venus brands, or wellness, what I call goddess Hestia, goddess of peace and healing. They were wellness archetypes, but who was going to go to this Phantom of the Opera energy. And so that was a unique and unconventional in the category. So looking for an unconventional archetype can be very insightful. The only question is you want to make sure that it's still relevant and will be appealing to people, because sometimes there's an unconventional archetype that simply would be a turnoff, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to be different just because. You need to be different in order to be relevant and inspiring, compelling, as as well.
Mm-hmm. And Jane, I have heard people actually even kind of push back sometimes on archetypes, saying the archetype should not be created by the founder or the internal, organization marketing. It should be dictated by how customers see you, so that you want to put out there, project an archetype that your customer cares about versus what's actually true and authentic to the personality of the company.
That's interesting. I mean, you've set up an either or here, and I'm always looking for the
Mm-hmm.
sweet spot that is the and. Because if you try to be what they want, but you are not authentically that, I don't know how you stand on that. But if you are the thing that you authentically are, but you're not meeting a customer desire, that's an issue too. So I actually think that we have to be in the and space between meeting that what is authentic and that which is desired. And where those two meet in that Venn diagram, that's the opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with you too, because I think it does start with doing self-examination. What is it that drives us here? Why do we do what we do, as Simon Sinek would say? And then how do we project ourselves to the world? And what is that current archetype look and feel like? Do our customers recognize and appreciate that particular personality archetype that is authentic to us? And then to your point, maybe it needs to be tweaked. It's an and thing. And in the work that I do with archetypes, I will always ask my customers to find one primary archetype, that one that is the most forceful, but then you may have two more sub-archetypes that come in and color that primary archetype, so that, because we all have nuances in our personalities, as do brands, and it's pretty hard to just say you are one thing. In your work, do you ascribe more than one archetype to a brand?
I like to practice ruthless simplicity when I'm thinking about the core. That the core, I call it the blueprint of the brand. I like to focus on one archetype and make a choice. I think that if you have a ruthlessly simple core ethos, but then you live that out in a multiplicity of ways with kind of ultimate creative, infinite creative exploration, that's my preference personally. I think that why I suggest that is when one wants to guard against the kitchen sink issue around trying to be all things to all people, and therefore struggling to have a clear, memorable meaning for people. And so I suggest focusing on a core archetype, but then being infinitely playful with all kinds of variety of tone and expressions of that.
Fair enough. All right. Number 3 in your exercises, I think you said you had 3 things that they could do. What would be the next thing they could do?
So we went through what's natural. We went through what's inspiring, and then the other one is the competitive mapping. So we look at the different
Mm-hmm.
players and what they're doing and where's the white space. And then the last one is, as you suggested, well, what do people want? We've got to find out what in the mindset that people are in when they're wanting to experience your product or service. What is the energy that will give them something, an experience that they're wanting to have? Because we have to meet people where they are and deliver something of value to them, an emotional experience that will be meaningful to them. So if this archetype won't resonate with them, then it's not right for your brand. And that's the final exercise I do recommend.
Great. All right. So you look at your category, then you examine what inspires you out there in the world. then from that, you look for those muses to come up with these different archetypes. You become ruthlessly simplistic in finding the one archetype, maybe based out of your 8 archetypes, and then you test that in the market to see how your customers and your prospects see you, and does that archetype personality connect with them. If it doesn't connect with them, yet it is authentic to you and your brand, what do you do? How do you overcome that?
I think you need to evolve a bit. There's some kind of disconnect, but actually between your product or service or offering, if the archetype that you are is not connecting with people. So I do think we tend to have maybe more going on in our companies than we might give ourselves credit for. So I think usually there's more than one archetype that we can possibly inhabit. It's usually not just one. I think there's usually a couple. And so I would be a little bit exploring about what is another archetype that is true to us. We just didn't think of it at first. And how do people connect with that? So keep searching, because I think sometimes there's gold in our companies and our products and services that we just maybe miss the first time around.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's why I think through our process with the story cycle system, chapter 6 in the 10-step process is defining your archetype. And that is indeed, because we found the same thing you did. If you land on just one, it may not cover all bases, and it might actually start causing some internal strife, let alone external strife. So we always ask that our people find that dominant archetype and then maybe come up with 2 other sub-archetypes, and then we have a discussion around that. Because to your point, it is hard to land on one primary archetype, even as you're being ruthlessly simplistic, which I totally appreciate. I am all about clarity and simplicity, but when it comes to the nuances of archetypes and personalities of brands, it's hard to achieve that sometimes.
I also think, Park, that companies have to have values that go beyond just one core value, or as you mentioned, Simon Sinek's why. So while in my blueprint, I focus on getting a lot of clarity around the core brand transmission, I think the company is going to have more values than just that. And that's important, and that will drive operations, and it will drive activations that ultimately uplift the brand experience and contribute to it. So I think that absolutely the company and everything you're doing, which is the brand, is going to have more than just one core value. But I do like the exercise of the focus, because I think that, again, then you can, once you have your North Star, as you get into the marketing, as you get into living the brand, you can always go back to it and make sure that you are traveling upon the path that you decided. And so it's very useful to have that focal point.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your book, The Goddess Guide to Branding, can you share one of your stories, your anecdotes, your case studies in there? One of your favorite ones that really stood out to you that demonstrates the power of finding the right archetype for a successful brand?
Yes, so a brand that's close to my heart, partially because, I wrote this book with my sister. She's the co-author, Kate McAndrew, and she is a venture capitalist who funds all kinds of startups, but she has a passion for funding female entrepreneurs. And Kate wrote the first check for this brand, which is called Bobby. And Bobby was started by Laura Modi, who is the CEO now, and Sarah Hardy. And when Laura Modi had her baby years ago, she struggled with feeding, and she walked to the infant formula aisle and was shocked by the ingredients that were in the product. And so she was already feeling bad. This is just the story that she relates in our book, and we interview her in the book. She was already feeling bad about not being able to breastfeed, and then she felt terrible about the product options that were on the table. And so she became determined to bring a cleaner, simpler baby formula to market. And Bobby was born. And so Bobby was playing in a branding space that was, as I mentioned before, medical. It had a medical boomer brand feeling, like these brands hadn't evolved since the 90s. And so Bobby came in and said, we're going to be, and so they didn't think this, but I think they channeled the archetype of Hestia, the goddess of peace and of healing. And so on the first kind of incarnation of the website, the statement to parents was, we lost sleep over this, so you don't have to. And so the idea was to deliver peace of mind to parents who were struggling with the most basic and important thing, which is to feed your child in the first months of life. And Bobby has become a haven for mothers telling their feeding stories, a place where it's safe to share. And it's a place, a community that's really a lot of grassroots storytelling around their feeding journeys. And Bobby supports that. And it supports peace of mind among mothers who may be really struggling emotionally with this very tough situation when you're struggling to feed your baby. So I think that's one of my favorite brands. And, they've done phenomenally well. Their growth has been extraordinary. So tapping into this peace of mind when other brands were not, and, bringing this authentic energy of two female co-founders, starting this from personal experience. I think this has it's been incredible. It's changed so many women's and families' lives. So I love this brand. And I think, to the part of storytelling, it's not the old days where you just have a 30-second commercial and you have a top-down message. I think allowing your customers to share their stories and be a hub for the sharing of stories, and not having total control, but rather allowing stories to be shared. I think this is certainly where we are now. And I think it's a very exciting place to be.
Without a doubt. You said this was the goddess of peace and healing, Hestia, Hestia.
Hestia. And so in ancient Greece, Hestia was the goddess of the hearth. And she represents the pure spirit of the people, the light. She represents the light. And so the wellness space often has a Hestia energy. And so this is really a pure product, and purity that creates a sense of peace is the energy that Bobby is channeling.
And in Carl Jung's world of archetypes, that would be the caregiver archetype. You have reframed it. And what I love what you're doing with this, because of the Greeks and how they essentially created archetypes of these gods, these fictitious gods, to try to make sense of everything that was happening around them, both environmentally, physically, emotionally, you name it. But really, if you think about it, it never occurred to me till speaking with you right now, Jane, that that's all they did is created archetypes to try to make meaning for the meaning-making mind of that Homo sapien, to try to describe what's going on, and of course to control populations. Because if you don't do what we ask of you, then Hades is going to show up and rip you a new one.
Well, as Joan Didion said, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. And stories help us make sense of the world around us, and they help us make sense of the experiences that we're having in our own lives. We resonate with these characters because they reflect truths about our own feelings, experiences, and desires. And so I think we can see a lot of Hollywood films reflecting ancient myths, just like you brought up Katniss Everdeen. These are ancient stories that are retold in contemporary ways because human nature persists.
Absolutely. And with that, where can people learn more about you and find your book?
I am at the Goddess Office. My sister and I have started a platform for elevating women and the archetypal feminine in business. So you can find us at goddessoffice.com, which will lead to my Substack, where I am sharing inspiration for working with purpose and style on a weekly basis. And then the Goddess Guide to Branding is available on Amazon. You can pre-order or purchase, because I think we're probably in the purchase point. So in any case, you can find the book on Amazon, and you can find me at goddessoffice.com.
Well, congratulations on the publishing of your book. I know in the notes that you sent over, you have written a few other books and didn't have success getting a publisher, which is fine because so many people self-publish this day and age. But it was a 20-year journey to get to where you are now. And like you said, life persists. It's all a part of the journey. You had those disappointing downfalls early on, but you didn't give up and you kept writing and you took what you learned and obviously what inspired you in the advertising marketing world in your young career and have brought it to life over now almost 15 years in the business and sharing your wisdom with the world. And for that, I congratulate you. And thank you for picking The Business of Story as your very first podcast. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you so much, Park. This has been wonderful.
Thanks so much for listening to and sharing this edition of The Business of Story with anyone you know who would really benefit by becoming a more confident, persuasive, clear, and compelling communicator using the power of story. Big shout out to Caden Howell for helping edit and produce this show, and for Darius Holbert for producing our excellent custom theme music. Hope you're going to join us next Monday when my fellow storytelling friend Tamsin Webster is here to share with you insights from her new book, Say What They Can't Unhear, The 9 Principles of Lasting Change. Until then, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make that one a great one. Thanks so much for listening.